Well, welcome everybody. It's time for the webinar talk show, but evidently in Texas, it's also time for Snowmageddon. So our wonderful Tom Singer is without Wi-Fi, without a lot of power, and everybody seems to be trying to use cell phone data at the same time. So we are missing Tom today. But it does point out one of the reasons that we say having a team of MCs is important because you know what? I am in Wisconsin, and while it is -4 degrees, I still have Wi-Fi and internet and data. So show must go on, as we say in the business. In this show, we have the incredible Lois Kramer as our guest. Now, Lois has spent her entire career in sales, which, if we're honest, almost all business, one way or the other, is about sales. And I know she has influenced my business for a lot of benefit. So we are so excited to have her here on the webinar talk show. Welcome, Lois Kramer.
Whoa. What a surprise. I was just reading a book. I was feeling a little stressed and was looking for a 911. And
Thanks, Lois.
good to see you.
Good to see you too. It is always a pleasure, and I always learn something that I can implement when I talk to you. So let's talk a little bit about why it's important to have clarity in your messaging when you're trying to make a sale.
I did something a few months ago that I'm going to be doing again in a couple of months. I did a challenge called the Clarity to Cash Challenge.
Ooh,
And
wait.
it's because I think it's so important that we're able to communicate our value in a compelling, memorable, and immediate way. And, Liz, one of the reasons I started my business 22 years ago, I can't believe it's been that long, but I was actually blonde back then. One of the reasons I started my business was my sense that speakers were not very good at communicating what they did when asked the simple question, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Most of them said, I'm a speaker and I speak on sales. I'm a speaker, I speak on leadership. And to me, it's a missed opportunity to introduce yourself by the way you put your information out in the marketplace, number one, and then by topic, number two. It really doesn't say much about what someone can accomplish with you. And so one of the guiding lights, really, of my business all these years later is what I call a positioning statement, the concept and outcome of working with you. So, for example, instead of saying I'm a speaker and I speak on sales, when I first started, I did some corporate sales meetings, and I said, I work with organizations that want to fast forward their selling skills so they'll be more successful at what they do. Now, you hear that's much more compelling than I speak on sales. And it also communicated to a buyer what they could accomplish by working with me. And it's a great way to start a conversation.
Right.
My sense too was that too many of us open up by saying, I speak, I write, I have products, I'm a butcher, a baker, and a
candlestick maker, yes.
And though I am a big believer in monetizing your message and using a number of platforms to take it to the marketplace, that's really the only way I think to have a thriving speaking practice these days. It's not what a buyer wants to hear. They want to hear an overall concept and an outcome. And then as the conversation goes on, it allows you to talk about the many ways you do what you do. And your perception as an expert, I think, is deeper the more ways you put this out in the marketplace.
Right.
So positioning statement is always my first stop on the road to clarity.
Well, and I have sat in a room with you. I have sat in a room when I used to run the academy for the Wisconsin chapter. This is not easy work. it is difficult to bring all of those things down into something that you can repeat that doesn't sound weird coming out of your mouth, all of that. But a lot of the people who watch this show are event professionals. When communicating value in that sense, whether you're communicating the value of your association or the value of attending an event or the value of attending a training if you're in-house, does the same thing work? Should we be looking at positioning statements for the conference that we're planning?
I think so. And, I think that lots of times people are too verbose. Imagine saying this to speakers. But often people, one of the things I say, and believe it or not, I actually still have friends in NSA, is that we use too many words to describe what we do. We assume more interest than there is.
Oh, interesting.
And really, in sales, to me, sales is supposed to be a conversation, not a monologue. And by opening up with a positioning statement, and I say 7 or 8 seconds or less.
Ooh,
that's all
that's
you
a
have.
challenge.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge. But my sense, people talk about elevator speeches. We've heard this forever. And I have neither attended a speech in an elevator nor given a speech in an elevator. But typically it's defined, an elevator speech is defined as 30 to 60 seconds. And even 30 seconds, if we sat here and looked at 30 seconds, it would seem very, very long. So that's what I mean by assuming interest. We sometimes assume there's more interest than there is. And truly in sales, what you want to do is you want to be in and out. Is this person a prospect? Do they have any interest in what I do? And if they don't, then I don't want to waste their time. I value people's time. And I don't want to waste mine either if I want to be productive in selling. So that's why I think that it needs to be just a short statement, one concept and outcome. Can be more than one outcome if it's short. For example, for Book More Business, I say I work with speakers who want to book more business, make more money, and monetize their message. But I still, using the power of 3, one of the oldest things that we all learn if we've ever taken marketing in school, it still is under 7 seconds saying that. And typically when you say that, somebody will say, how do you do that? Then, hey, thanks for asking. I do it through my writing. I've written a book. I do webinars. I speak professionally. I consult. Then you can list the number of ways and see where their interest lies. But it's a conversation.
Right. And it's that, oh, interesting. How do you do that you want as a response? Not the sort of glassed over like, oh my goodness, I did not ask for that much information.
That's exactly right. And typically someone will say, how do you do that? Or they'll say, well, how nice for you.
Right.
Which also lets us know they have absolutely no interest in what we do. But I say that is a net positive.
Okay.
Because, we have a finite amount of time to draw interest into what we do. Most of us are solopreneurs. And so we really want to know, we want people in or out. And much in the same way, on your website, my favorite thing for website homepages is to have your picture up there and then your positioning statement. Let somebody see immediately whether this is something they want to pursue or this isn't a fit for them.
So let's go back to thinking about communicating the value of attending a conference, because I know right now that's a struggle, especially if it's a conference that is now for the second time around going to be different than people have had in the past. Is the power of that outcome, so the end of it, you said, you do these magic 3 things. Is the power of the outcome as valuable there?
I think it's incredibly valuable there. We're in such a strange time. And I think we all need to be prepared for the next thing, which is going to be hybrid.
Yes.
So
agreed.
we're all experienced in person. We're all getting more experienced if you aren't already in virtual. And now the trick, I think, is to tie the two together
Mm-hmm.
and still be effective. But I think one of the hills that we had to climb when this pandemic started, for example, and it's quite frankly a hill that we need to climb regardless of situation, is letting people know this is worth your time. And here
Right.
is why this is worth your time.
Right.
And when we switched initially to all virtual, people weren't used to buying meetings virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Now, corporations and private businesses are very used to buying virtual. They know the value in virtual, but still
Right.
in selling it, you need to convince people this is worth your time and money in most cases.
Right. So that's the value piece, is like, how do we convince them that it is indeed worth their time and money? And I think a
Yeah.
lot of what used to be kind of easy about selling your conference is people absolutely wanted to be together with their people. Like, I know for us, we're both members of the National Speakers Association. I want to hug me a Lois Kramer.
Yeah.
That will get me. I'm like 75% there already. Now you throw in one speaker that I'm like, oh, well,
Now I'm getting a little misty by this whole.
I miss the hugging. I do.
Well, I do too. I still think though that one of the things that we're finding out though is that you still can create a sense of community. Granted, we can't
Mm-hmm.
hug each other virtually, and I think that is still something that we need to remind people.
Right.
When I've been telling my clients this: make sure that your clients appreciate the immediacy of a virtual meeting. This is something
Yeah.
they can decide on immediately. The value that you can bring, the outcomes that you can deliver, and meeting virtually in and of itself is an act of engagement for your members, for
Yeah.
your employees. And this is something that people need now more than ever,
Mm-hmm.
I think, as we're living right now, mostly in a virtual situation. Yeah,
In the box.
exactly. Yeah. So, I think that there are many, many ways to sell virtually. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there is a big difference, quite frankly, between selling virtually at this point where we are, between selling virtually and in person. But I do think it is smart to push the engagement
Mm-hmm.
argument. This is an act of engagement, being together.
Right.
And we have seen some within our own association, National Speakers Association. We have seen them create moments of engagement,
Absolutely.
periods of engagement in totally virtual events.
Well,
And this has been really heartwarming to me.
so in full disclosure, I'm on the planning committee for our annual event, and the desire to be at the forefront of what a hybrid, high quality, highly engaged virtual hybrid event looks like is very exciting.
It
And you're
is.
right, that engagement piece is incredibly important. Uh, Again, I think that's what a lot of us attend events to get, is that being in the same room with people who have similar experiences. For us speakers, we have
Yes.
weird jobs, so therefore. But I
Yes.
think also for meeting professionals, I think that's why your ASAE events and your MPI events and the different events in the meeting industry are so important, is you get to sit in a room with people who actually understand what you do.
Yes,
And
which is, as we both know, when we talk to our friends, they have no. My husband still doesn't know what I do. So it is. It is. I'll tell you something else about virtual that I think is exciting.
Mhm.
I was listening to a panel discussion about virtual. This was maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and the head of Microsoft Teams was on. And he was, of course, talking about how great their platform is. And Microsoft, some may recall who are connected with the tech world, they came out very early in this pandemic time last year and said, we are not having meetings at least through 2022. We're not going to have in-person meetings. And so last year, they decided they're going to switch their user conference, which brings thousands of people to these tiny cities in California, and you get a hotel room about 2 hours away because there are only 3 Motel 6s, within 100 miles. And they get thousands of people. I think he said in 2019, they had a little over 4,000 people at the Microsoft user conference. So they went all virtual, crossed their fingers, said this is a great way to promote Microsoft Teams, isn't it, by having a virtual meeting. They had 50,000 people.
Holy cow. Yeah.
And so I said, why would you ever want to have an in-person meeting again? And they do, because of some of the reasons you just brought up. But he said, we never will without having a virtual component.
Right.
They had people from all over the world who would have never flown to California to attend this meeting. But it shows you the power of this and the value of this, that people can access. Liz, I was talking to somebody who was interested in NSA. And they did not live in a city with a chapter. And I said, good news, you can attend any chapter you want to.
Right.
There are many blessings that have come out of this. And I think that sometimes when we're feeling a little down, we need to remind ourselves of the blessings that have come out of this. So virtually, we can connect anywhere. I was using Zoom with my private clients for a long time. I began using just Skype when we just had Skype.
I remember.
And, because my sense was this: if I'm working with a client and I'm giving them a suggestion for their business, I want to know if they're going, oh, that sounds great.
Or like glassy eye.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so, we know that there are the many benefits of virtual. I think that is definitely going to be the challenge, is perfecting, if you will, and it's always going to be a work in progress to me, perfecting the hybrid model to engage everybody in the room as well as those online. And, I remember you were the first person to host the hybrid NSA meeting.
Yeah,
and
way back in the day.
I remember I was one of the interviews who slid in between events, and so NSA was getting in on this kind of early. Little did we know that was going to be practice for the way of the world for over a year.
Yeah, it took a while. And Tom and I have been doing this kind of work for 7 years, and there hasn't been a lot of appetite for that hybrid experience. Reasonably, it was prohibitively expensive. I think one of your blessings is that the cost of technology, because we've all had to scramble to get this together, is coming down, which is great. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of communicating value, however, is that sponsor or vendor relationship, because a lot of our conferences, whether they're in-person, hybrid, or virtual, we rely on sponsors or vendors.
Yes.
And it is perceived to be harder to provide sponsor or vendor value in a virtual environment. But I want to share a story with you. And I think I was influenced by one Lois Kramer as I was sharing this model. I know. So really, I sat down with a group. It was the Wisconsin Pest Control Association just had their event last week. I produced the event on my Zoom platform because it was a smaller conference and emceed it. So it's for a smaller conference. This is a really easy. Once you get too big, I'm not technology is not advanced enough on Zoom for me to do a big conference. But if you got a couple hundred people, let's make it work. So they have sponsors that are all in the pest control arena. We looked at what do they really want. They want to be in front of the attendees. They want to have conversations with the attendees. They want to be able to give their little, on my desk, I have a sample, maybe something I shouldn't have, but I do, of a product. So these are the things that they would want if we were in person. We looked at how can we provide that in the virtual environment, and it was a fully virtual conference. So all of our sponsors were allowed to have a commercial that was played in between segments. Our brown sponsors got a short one, silver a little bit longer, gold a little bit longer. We also had session sponsors that got to do an interview like this with me, and we talked about their company, we talked about their products. One, we talked about what one of them was doing to control rats on the Galapagos to protect birds and turtles. It was really cool.
Yeah.
Then we had a Zoom breakout lunch where those gold sponsors got to have a breakout room, and people could come and talk to them.
Love it.
And I heard from several sponsors, one of which said, I got so much more than we got in person. I really loved it. So now it's like, how do we then provide that when we go back into the in-person environment, hopefully, which will also be hybrid. But now that we've done that, expectations are higher in terms of how they can, and there are lots of platforms. We interviewed Excel Events last week on what they're doing for vendors and sponsors. If I'm an event professional and I'm trying to communicate to a sponsor or a vendor why you should be part of my event, being clear about the value you're providing, I can imagine, is extraordinarily important.
Well, it absolutely is. That's why they're sponsoring. Right. The interesting thing about what you just said is this is a great example, though. This is a great template for people to use, because typically, when you're talking about a big conference and they have sponsors, you see their logos.
Right.
You see their names.
Right.
And they might have a trade show booth.
Correct.
But that's, unless you overtly reach out to them, you're not going to have a conversation.
Right.
And virtually, what you did was you brought them to the forefront, and which is what we ideally want to do all the time with sponsors, and let people, I'm sure people were more interested in the sponsorships because of the depth that you went into what they did and the way you put them up front. I think that this, quite frankly, may be more appealing.
I think in some ways it may be. In going forward in that hybrid environment, I think we're going to have to really think about all the ways we could actually provide value to a sponsor, not just the typical, here's your, 8x8 sponsor booth or whatever, in addition to.
And, in NSA, remember in the before days, we always had someone going around the first day that the trade show booths were open, interviewing for maybe 20, 30 seconds, putting it on the in-house TV in the hotel, which I don't know who watched it, but I actually did.
But it was there.
I actually did. Now we're really, it gives an opportunity to put sponsors front and center instead of just a logo behind somebody who's speaking on a main platform, possibly. So, there are interesting ways, and we're all learning, how do we create value in every way for participants, sponsors, everybody. And I think that we're learning as we go. I think this is part of the fun of the journey, quite frankly. We're finding new and innovative ways to communicate value of everyone participating in a meeting.
Right.
But I loved your story. I think it is compelling. And I think that this is a great example when people ask, why should I be a sponsor? I feel like virtually, they may see my logo. What's in it for me? being able to outline exactly what's in it for you and maybe even show an example would be a great
Right.
idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is ample opportunity, especially when you're in a conference where that sponsor may have a product that could work into a session.
Oh, yes.
um,
Yeah.
that sort of that sneaky product placement is certainly possible. There's all I could talk about this for hours, but Lois, our time is up already.
What?
I know it goes so fast sometimes. And I knew when Tom was texting and calling today with his Snowmageddon emergency, I'm like, oh, but we have Lois. Lois and I can talk. Well, we could talk till the cows come home,
Well,
for sure.
we could. And, I am a fan of yours. And immediately after we end this interview, I'm going back to reading.
You're so kind. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. It has been a pleasure, Lois, to have you on the show as always. We are live Mondays and Wednesdays at 11 o'clock Central Time. You can find us at webinartalkshow.live. That's where you'll find the live versions. And Lois is pointing to webinartalkshow.com. That is where you'll find information about Tom and I and what we do for conferences and clients, whether that's production or emceeing or a combination of both. Thank you so much again, Lois. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Tom, we hope the Snowmageddon ends soon. See you all on Wednesday. We have Beth Z, your nerdy best friend, on Wednesday. I know, we're excited. Have a great day. See you soon.